Hello, Chris Brooks here with the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources, and I'm here today at just an amazingly beautiful spot. We're at Shelburne Farms. It's about a 20-minute drive south of UVM's campus, and I'm joined today by Sam Dixon, who is the dairy farm manager here at Shelburne Farms. So Sam, I wonder if you could start by just giving us some background information about the dairy operation here in terms of the size of your herd, your grazing and milking practices, and just your general philosophy about managing a dairy operation like this.
Yeah, Shelburne Farms dairy, we milk about 120 purebred registered brown Swiss cows. This herd was started back in 1950 by Derek Webb. It's been a long established purebred registered herd of brown Swiss. We started making cheese from the milk of the cows in 1983, I believe. Actually, when I was a student at UVM, you could buy Shelburne Farms raw milk in cartons in the Grand Union in downtown Burlington. So we've always had sort of this tradition of direct marketing and trying to add value to the milk that the cows produce. Currently, we're making about 170,000 pounds of cheese a year from the milk produced by these cows. We're what's called a grass-based dairy. We focus our management on grazing and getting the cows out as much as possible to graze so they can derive as much of their nutrition from pasture as possible. We have long winters in Vermont, so we do have to barn animals up, and this time of year we're switching over to more of a winter feeding program where we feed round bale silage, dry hay, and then supplement that with grain for their winter feeding.
Great. So I'm interested in nutrient planning here on the farm. We know that nutrient pollution, primarily phosphorus, is driving impairment of water quality in Lake Champlain. And here at Shelburne Farms, you're right on the lake. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you plan to manage nutrients and manage all of the manure produced by your herd.
Sure. We are right on the lake, and we do have about 2 miles of lakefront. The primary way we're trying to manage the land and the cows and the manure is by our all-grass grazing program. The whole farm is in sod, either permanent hay or permanent pasture. We're not doing any corn or any row crops, and that's really one of the primary sources of non-point source pollution going into Lake Champlain is from erosion from field crops. And so by having the whole farm in a sod, we're really eliminating that source of pollution. But we also have, the cows are pooping, and when they do go out and graze, and then we have the manure from the barn that we spread, and we just try to manage those nutrients to feed back onto the soil. We have a nutrient management plan whereby we plan out where we're spreading all the manure. We record that. We take manure samples. We also take soil samples every 3 years so that we're making sure not to put too much manure on certain fields, and we can spread it around. We also have a buffer area around the lake where we don't graze any animals and we don't spread any manure. We follow all of the best management practices that you'd find in the state regulations or in Farm Service Agency type recommendations, with setbacks from water. Cows are fenced out of streams and brooks, and then we try to manage where the manure is spread, and also the timing of the spreading is really important. We have a large manure storage that gives us about 7 months of storage, so we don't have to spread through the winter. We can store the manure. There is actually a winter spreading ban in Vermont that prohibits you from spreading manure from December 15th to April 1st. So we've got actually more flexibility because of our large manure storage, and that allows us to target those manure spreadings when they're going to do the most good. After first cutting, after second cutting, and third cutting, we really tried to, over the past few years, adopt a philosophy of spreading less more often. Instead of having a huge spreading event in the spring and a huge spreading event in the fall, trying to get less manure out more often through the season where the plants have an opportunity to take it up and use it as fertilizer. I really see this as an area where good environmental practices and good economics come together. If we're spreading a lot of manure and a lot of it's running off and a lot of it's ending up in the lake, not only are we creating an environmental problem and polluting the lake, but to me, we're also wasting money. Those are nutrients we want to capture and recycle here on the farm. I don't want to see them running off, because that's fertilizer that I want to capture and reuse and keep cycling on the farm.
Sure. So Sam, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about nutrient management. You've got rotational grazing practices going on across the farm. You're maintaining buffers in spots away from the lake. Can you talk a little bit about managing runoff right here in the barnyard? You've got animals in the barn, you've got a manure pit, and just explain how you're trying to use sort of ecological processes to limit nutrients from getting in the lake.
Yeah, we've done a bunch of different, I guess, and you might call it engineering or landscaping to sort of try to control the runoff that's coming from this site. We have a lot of animals outside, but we also barn up in the winter, and we have animals in barns and around barns, and there's all the runoff that's coming just from this dairy site. And so we really need to look at that and how we're managing that. The first thing that we've got is we put in a ditch that sort of catches all of the runoff from this site. It's a shallow slope ditch with a wide bottom that very much slows the water runoff. As it's running off this site, it hits that ditch, and then it runs very slowly through that ditch and picks up all the nutrients coming off of the dairy site, and then it goes actually into a constructed wetland. We put believe it's called a subsurface flow gravel filter wetland, where we actually engineered a wetland and planted certain plants and have a series of ponds that the water flows through, just to kind of slow it down, gives these plants that have the ability to take up a lot of nutrients a chance to sort of take as many of those nutrients out of the water that's coming off the dairy site. And then from there, it actually goes into a natural wetland. We call it elm swamp. And as it sort of meanders through this large swamp, and then it outlets in the lake. And it's really important for us to manage this runoff, because not only would it be bad to pollute the lake, but we have had in the past a lot of summer camps, and this all outlets right at the beach where the summer camps swim. So we're really trying to watch this runoff and control it. And we test on a weekly basis the water that's flowing through this system, and we have not exceeded state or federal standards for the last memory that I can have. It's been a very effective natural system that's cleaning those nutrients as the water is flowing to the lake. But the general principle is just to slow it down and run it through plants. And that'll do a lot to clean the water.
So lots of really directed steps you're taking to manage nutrients. I'd like for you to talk a little bit more broadly about other strategies in terms of preserving ecological values across the farmscape here. So you've got animals grazing out in the fields, and this is also providing important wildlife habitat. Can you talk a little bit about how you manage to protect areas for, say, grassland nesting birds?
Absolutely. I feel it's really important to understand ecosystems and how they work and natural cycles, and use those to inform our farming practices. So understanding soil ecology, the water cycle, understanding how plants grow, the interaction of plants and animals, and all of those to enhance our management. We also are managing a landscape with a lot of different stakeholders here, one of which is the wildlife that inhabits the farm with us. So we maintain a wide variety of different habitats. There's a lot of field edges and transition zones. The elm swamp is certainly a rich and diverse habitat. But I also learned about these transition zones. We have an invasive species here called buckthorn, which it's really bad. Anytime you don't mow anything, you get this buckthorn moving in field edges. But I also learned that that's an excellent habitat for rabbits. And then the rabbits serve as a prey species for bobcats. So we actually have a really healthy bobcat population on the farm because of this wide variety of different habitats we have in the landscape. One of the most rewarding and interesting things I've been involved with in the past I think this was the 19th field season of the grassland bird study, where initially we were just measuring the life cycle of the bobolink and the savanna sparrow when they came back, and the effects of haying on those populations. And then over time, as we learn more about it, the researchers developed some recommendations on how we might alter our cutting practices to accommodate the life cycle of these grassland birds, and we've adopted a lot of those strategies into our grassland management. One is what's called an early cut, late cut. So we want to try to get out as early as possible for the first cut when the hay is of the highest quality for the dairy cows. And that's also before the birds have really started arriving. They're migratory birds. The bobolink in particular fly a long way. They come all the way from Argentina, and they begin to arrive in about middle May and start setting up their nesting sites. So if we can get out and take the hay early, that's before they've really started their life cycle. And then if we wait 60 days, 65 days, then that gives the birds a chance to set their nests up, lay their eggs, fledge their young, and go through their life cycle. And then we take that next cutting. The feed isn't really high enough quality for the dairy cows, but it's certainly adequate for heifers and dry cows. And we also have a sheep flock on the farm and some beef cows on the farm. So we're able to use it in other parts of the operation. So that's one strategy. The next strategy is a much more traditional haying strategy. In the old timers used to not start haying until the 4th of July. We have some land that we wait until July before we cut, and we've tried to plant certain grasses on those fields that are later maturing, so there's still some feed quality coming off of those fields, and we can feed dry cows and larger heifers and beef cows with that feed. And so we just wait until July, and that gives the birds a chance to come in and set up their nests and go through their life cycle and fledge their young, and gives them an opportunity there. The next strategy we use is just waiting until August. There's very little feed quality coming off of those fields. We then are able to use that material for bedding in our barn. So we've integrated that into our farming operation. The one thing that we've learned about that is it's very important to remove that material from the fields for the next season. So what attracts the birds to a field when they're migrating back is green grass. So if you just mow those fields and leave the grass, it tends to suppress the grass growth the next spring, so they're less attractive to the birds. By removing that, we're enhancing the habitat for the next year. And we are able to use that as bedding in the winter. And we have what's called a bedded pack for our heifers and sheep, where we basically just keep a deep organic matter bedding and then dig that out. And this time of year we're getting ready to start spreading that stuff back on the fields for the crop for next year. We've also tried to manage some of our pastures for the grassland birds too, letting some of the pastures get very mature before we're turning livestock in, and that works for some older dry cows in the summer.
Great. Sam, it's great to get your perspective and learn about the various ways that you are managing this working landscape here at Shelburne Farms. Thanks for chatting with us today.
Yeah, sure, no problem, my pleasure.